The morning sun crested the peaks of the Appalachian Mountains, casting long shadows across the hollow where the log cabin stood. It was a sturdy structure built by hands that knew the language of wood and stone, a solitary outpost against the vast wildernesses of West Virginia. For the man who lived there, it was both sanctuary and self-imposed exile. Nathan Winters stood on the cabin porch, a steaming mug of coffee warming his hands against the autumn chill. At 42, his tall frame still held the disciplined strength of his Marine days, though the short brown hair was now streaked with silver at the temples, a premature map of burdens carried too long. His face, framed by a neatly trimmed beard, bore the harsh lines etched by sun and stress, softened only by deep-set hazel eyes that often held a distant, haunted look. The silence was broken by a low whine. Shat-adadum, a magnificent German shepherd with a striking coat of slate gray and snow white lay at Nathan's feet, amber eyes fixed on his master's face. The dog was more than a pet. He was an anchor, a silent confidant who understood the unspoken language of Nathan's pain. Shadow had been with him since returning from his final deployment, a military working dog who, like Nathan, couldn't quite readjust to civilian life. From inside the cabin came the sound of small feet padding across wooden floors, followed by the appearance of Lily, Nathan's 9-year-old daughter. Her dark hair was still tousled from sleep, her mother's green eyes bright despite the early hour. She slipped her small hand into her father's larger one, a gesture that had become their wordless morning ritual. The cabin sat alone on 20 acres of woodland, far from neighbors or passing traffic. Nathan had chosen this isolation deliberately after Sarah's death 3 years ago, a head-on collision with a drunk driver that had left him a widower and Lily motherless. The military had already taken parts of him. That accident had taken what remained of his faith in the world outside these mountains. Inside the cabin was simple but comfortable. Nathan had built most of the furniture himself during those first dark months after Sarah. Woodworking became therapy, each sanded edge and hammered nail an attempt to rebuild something when everything felt broken. Lily's drawings hung on every wall, bright splashes of crayon and colored pencil depicting their small family, Lily, Nathan's shadow, and always somewhere in the corner or in the sky, Sarah as an angel watching over them. A shelf held Nathan's few military mementos, his service medals, a folded flag, and a photograph of his recon team in Afghanistan. 5 men standing arm in arm, desert dust coating their uniforms, exhausted grins belying the tension in their eyes. Nathan was the only one still alive. The morning followed their usual routine. Nathan prepared a simple breakfast while Lily set the table. They ate together as Nathan reviewed her lessons for the day. Since moving to the mountains, he'd been homeschooling Lily using curriculum provided by the state, but supplementing it with practical skills he believed more valuable than standardized testing could measure. Nathan watched his daughter methodically solve math problems, her brow furrowed in concentration. She had Sarah's determination, her refusal to give up even when frustrated. The sight sent a familiar pang through his chest, grief that never quite faded, just changed shape over time. Sometimes he caught glimpses of Sarah so strong in Lily's expressions that it took his breath away. As Lily worked, Nathan checked their supplies. Her school break started tomorrow, and he'd promised to take her deeper into the mountains for her first real hunting trip. Not that they needed the meat, his military pension and Sarah's life insurance provided enough, but Nathan believed in self-sufficiency, in knowing how to survive using what the land provided. The day passed in quiet productivity. Afternoon found them in the clearing behind the cabin, where Nathan had set up targets for Lily's marksmanship practice. He'd started teaching her with a BB gun when she was 7, instilling strict safety protocols before anything else. Now she handled a small .22 rifle with surprising competence for her age. A sharp crack echoed across the clearing as Lily squeezed the trigger. The tin can at 30 yards jumped and toppled. Shadow's ears twitched at the sound, but he remained calm, trained to ignore gunfire. Nathan nodded his approval, but his mind briefly slipped elsewhere to another time, another place where the sounds were louder and the targets were not tin cans. The memory ambushed him, sometimes dragging him back to that final mission in Kandahar province. The intelligence had been solid, a high-value target in a remote compound, but someone had tipped them off. The ambush was waiting. He'd watched his team die one by one, powerless to save them, despite everything he tried. Lily's voice pulled him back. The world refocused, the clearing, the trees, his daughter's concerned face. This happens sometimes, these momentary absences. Lily had learned to recognize the signs to call him back gently. She never mentioned it afterward, just as he never mentioned the nights he found her crying in her room, clutching her mother's photograph. That night, after Lily was asleep, Nathan sat at the kitchen table cleaning their rifles for tomorrow's trip. Shadow lay nearby, alert even in rest. The dog's ears suddenly pricked forward, head rising as he stared intently at nothing. A low growl rumbled in his chest. Nathan froze, hand tightening on the cleaning rod. Shadow was trained to detect threats, human or animal, long before they became visible. But the growl subsided as quickly as it had started, and the dog settled back down with a soft huff. False alarm. Nathan released the breath he had been holding. The incident left him on edge, though. Out here, isolation was both protection and vulnerability. The nearest neighbor was 5 miles away. The nearest police station 20. If trouble came, they were on their own. Sleep eluded Nathan that night. He lay awake listening to the familiar sounds of the forest through the open window, the distant hoot of an owl, the rustle of leaves in the breeze. His mind circled back to the upcoming trip with Lily. Was he doing right by her, raising her so far from other children? Sarah would have had doubts. She'd always been the one who pushed for balance, for maintaining connections to the world. But that world had taken her, had taken his team. What remained was here, these mountains, Lily's shadow. Everything else felt like a threat waiting to materialize. Dawn arrived with fog clinging to the treetops. Nathan rose before first light, packed their gear, efficiently, habits of military precision never quite abandoned. 2 backpacks with essentials, water purification tablets, first aid supplies, emergency rations, extra ammunition, compass, and map. He taught Lily to navigate by stars, but some lessons were better reinforced with proper tools. Lily emerged from her room dressed in layers. The nights would be cold this time of year. Her eyes were bright with excitement. This expedition represented a milestone, a recognition of her growing skills. Shadow paced by the door, sensing the impending adventure. They set out as the first rays of sunlight pierced the mist, walking single file along a game trail that wound up the ridge behind their property. Nathan led, scanning constantly for signs of danger, human or animal. Shadow ranged ahead, occasionally circling back to check on them. Lily followed, matching her father's deliberate pace, absorbing his silent lessons in movement and awareness. By midday, they'd covered 6 miles of increasingly rugged terrain. The forest had changed character, the familiar mixed hardwoods of lower elevations, giving way to stands of towering pine and hemlock. They stopped in a small clearing for lunch, sitting on fallen logs, while Nathan pointed out different bird calls to Lily. For a brief, precious moment, Nathan felt something like peace. The weight he carried, grief, guilt, hypervigilance, seemed lighter here, away from the cabin, with its ghosts and memories. Lily was smiling, recounting a story about a deer family they'd spotted earlier. Shadow lay contented at their feet. If happiness was still possible in this world, perhaps this was as close as it came. They made camp as evening approached, finding a defensible spot near a small stream. Nathan showed Lily how to set up their lean-to shelter, explaining each step in the methodical way he approached all their lessons. Together they gathered firewood, filtered water from the stream, and prepared a simple dinner over the small contained fire. Night settled around them, the fire casting dancing shadows against the surrounding trees. Lily curled against Nathan's side, asking questions about the stars, visible through gaps in the canopy. He pointed out constellations, explaining how they had guided sailors and travelers for thousands of years before GPS and digital compasses. The first night passed uneventfully. Nathan slept lightly, waking at every unfamiliar sound, but Shadow remained calm throughout, a reassuring presence. Morning broke cold and clear, promising good hunting conditions. After a quick breakfast, they broke camp efficiently, leaving no trace of their presence. Nathan had spotted deer tracks the previous evening and decided to follow them. The teaching opportunity was perfect, fresh sign, clear direction of travel, ideal terrain for a stealthy approach. Hours passed as they tracked their quarry, moving slowly and deliberately through the forest. Nathan pointed out subtle signs to Lily, a bent twig, a scuff in the dirt, the faint, musky scent carried on the breeze. She absorbed everything with intense concentration, her small hand occasionally reaching for his when the terrain grew challenging. By mid-morning, their patience was rewarded. Nathan spotted fresh tracks in a patch of soft earth, a white-tailed deer, and a large one, judging by the depth of the hoofprints. He knelt, examining the trail, while Lily watched attentively. Shadow stood beside them, body quivering with restrained excitement, his nose twitching as he sorted through the complex tapestry of woodland smells. They followed the trail up a gentle slope through a grove of ancient hemlocks and across a rocky outcrop that offered a sweeping view of the valley below. The tracks led them down into a denser part of the woods where sunlight struggled to pierce the thick ceiling of leaves. It was here, as they closed in on their prey, that something shifted. Shadow, who had been the picture of disciplined focus, suddenly stopped dead in his tracks. His head went up, ears swiveled forward, and a low growl rumbled in his chest. Nathan froze, hand instinctively tightening on his rifle. He scanned the trees, searching for any sign of a bear or another predator, but saw nothing, heard nothing but the gentle rustle of leaves in the breeze. The deer tracks continued straight ahead, but Shadow had completely lost interest in them. The dog turned his head sharply to the left toward a part of the forest that was even thicker and darker, a tangle of rhododendron and thorny vines that descended into a steep, shadowed ravine. He let out a sharp, insistent bark, a sound he rarely made while hunting. The noise would surely alert any game in the vicinity, but Shadow seemed unconcerned with that now, his amber eyes locked with Nathan's. Then he barked again and took a few steps toward the ravine. Lily moved closer to her father, sensing the change in atmosphere. Nathan studied Shadow's behavior with growing unease. This wasn't normal. The dog was highly disciplined and had never abandoned a fresh trail like this. Something had triggered his training, something he perceived as more important than their hunt. Nathan made a quick decision. The deer could wait. Trusting Shadow's instincts was a rule he never broke. He signaled to Lily to stay close and follow his lead. With a brief command to Shadow, they changed direction, heading toward whatever had captured the dog's attention. The descent into the ravine was treacherous. The ground was steep and slick with damp moss, forcing them to use their hands for balance. Nathan helped Lily navigate the difficult terrain, occasionally lifting her over fallen logs or across small crevices. Shadow moved ahead with confident footing, pausing frequently to look back and ensure they were still following. The air in the ravine felt heavy and still thick with the smell of damp earth and decay. It was a place seemingly forgotten by time, where sunlight barely penetrated the dense canopy above. As they pushed deeper, Nathan noticed something strange, an unnatural line cutting through the trees, a scar where mature trunks had been snapped like twigs years ago, though new growth had done its best to hide the wound. Shadow grew increasingly agitated the farther they went, whining and occasionally pawing at the ground. Finally, he stopped at the base of the ravine, barking softly at a wall of thick green vines that covered a large dark shape. Nathan approached cautiously, breath quickening with a sudden, inexplicable sense of dread and curiosity. He pushed aside a curtain of vines, revealing what lay beneath. It wasn't rock. It was metal, rusted, dented, and scarred, but unmistakably metal. He tore away more of the vegetation, exposing an olive-drab surface. A strange angular shape began to emerge, a form completely alien to the organic chaos of the forest surrounding it. The realization hit him like a physical blow. He was staring at the wreckage of an AH-64 Apache attack helicopter. It was half buried in the earth, tilted on its side like a slain beast. Nature had worked tirelessly to reclaim it, wrapping it in a shroud of green, but its violent mechanical skeleton remained a tomb of steel, hidden away in the deep silence of the woods. Lily gasped behind him, her small hand gripping the back of his jacket. Shadow stood silently now, as if he understood the gravity of their discovery. A heavy silence descended upon the ravine, broken only by the distant call of a bird and the soft rustling of leaves overhead. The sight of the downed Apache sent a chill through Nathan that had nothing to do with the cool mountain air. It was a visceral reaction. The unexpected presence of a machine of war in this peaceful wilderness felt like a desecration. For a long moment, he could only stare, his mind reeling. Then his training reasserted itself, pushing back the flood of emotions and replacing them with analytical calm. He needed to be cautious. An old crash site could be dangerous, sharp metal, unstable ground. Who knew what else? He instructed Lily to stay with Shadow while he investigated, his voice gentle but firm. She nodded, wide-eyed but obedient, her hand moving to rest on Shadow's head for reassurance. Nathan began a slow, careful circle of the wreckage. The helicopter was mangled, a testament to the violence of its final moments. One side was crushed against the steep wall of the ravine, while the other was exposed, its cockpit canopy shattered. He moved with practiced ease, eyes scanning for any immediate threats. The years had stripped the wreckage of any leaking fluids, and time had settled the machine firmly into the earth. As he drew closer to the cockpit, Another realization struck him. There were no identifying markings anywhere on the helicopter. No insignia, no serial numbers, nothing to indicate which branch of the military it belonged to. In his 15 years of service, Nathan had never seen a military aircraft without proper identification. This wasn't just unusual, it was wrong. His approach to the cockpit was somber. The shattered acrylic offered a grim view of the interior, with a sense of duty he couldn't quite explain. Nathan carefully pulled away a few more vines and peered inside. The pilot was still there. What remained of him was skeletal, clad in the tattered remains of a flight suit strapped into the pilot's seat. Nathan felt a profound wave of sadness wash over him. This was a fellow soldier, a brother in arms left to the lonely silence of the woods. He deserved better. Nathan offered a silent prayer, a moment of respect for a man he never knew, but whose fate was now intertwined with his. His gaze swept over the cockpit, a chaotic mess of broken instruments and decaying upholstery. His military experience told him what to look for. Pilots often carried personal effects or mission-critical items in designated storage compartments. Most of the compartments had been torn open by the crash, their contents long since destroyed by the elements. But one caught his eye, a heavy-duty standard-issue gear case tucked under the co-pilot's seat, seemingly intact. However, it was secured with a sturdy combination lock. Nathan's curiosity warred with his reverence for the dead. What was inside? Why was it locked so securely? He tried to pull the case free, but it was wedged tightly between twisted metal. He needed leverage. Retreating from the wreckage, he found a fallen branch, thick and strong, and returned to the cockpit. Using the branch as a pry bar, he wedged it between the case and the twisted frame of the seat. He grunted with effort, the muscles in his back and shoulders straining. With a final groaning screech of metal, the case broke free and tumbled onto the cockpit floor. He lifted it out and placed it on a patch of mossy ground. It was heavier than expected. He examined the lock, but there was no obvious way to force it open without proper tools. While he pondered his next move, Shadow, who had been watching patiently with Lily from a safe distance, suddenly approached the wreckage. The dog ignored the case Nathan was focused on and began sniffing intently at the cockpit again. He whined, then began pawing insistently at a floor panel near the pilot's rudder pedals, a spot Nathan had overlooked. Nathan returned to the cockpit, kneeling to examine the area Shadow was so fixated on. It looked like any other part of the floor, but when he pressed down, he felt a slight give. Using the tip of his hunting knife, he pried at the edge. A hidden compartment no bigger than a hardback book popped open. Inside, nestled in protective foam, was not a weapon or a piece of survival gear. It was a ruggedized military hard drive wrapped in a sealed waterproof bag. Nathan's pulse quickened. This was not standard equipment. This was something someone wanted to keep hidden and safe. The locked case suddenly seemed less important than this concealed device. He carefully removed the hard drive from its hiding place, turning it over in his hands. No markings, no labels, nothing to indicate its contents or ownership. Just like the helicopter itself, anonymous, stripped of identity. Nathan looked from the hard drive to the silent pilot, then to Lily and Shadow waiting at the edge of the clearing. The peaceful hunting trip had taken an unexpected turn. He had stumbled upon something significant. He could feel it in his bones. Years in reconnaissance had taught him to recognize the weight of discovery, the moment when a routine patrol suddenly becomes something else entirely. He secured the hard drive in his pack and made one final sweep of the cockpit, looking for anything else of note. On the pilot's remains, he spotted a name tape barely visible on the tattered flight suit Weber. At least now the dead man had a name. Captain Weber, according to the faded rank insignia. As they climbed back up the ravine, Lily bombarded him with questions. What was a military helicopter doing here? Who was the pilot? What happened? Nathan answered as honestly as he could without alarming her. But his mind was racing ahead. The absence of identifying markings, the hidden hard drive, this wasn't a simple training accident or mechanical failure. Something deliberate, something covert had happened here. By the time they reached the top of the ravine, the afternoon was waning. Nathan made a quick decision. Though they had planned to camp for another night, the discovery changed everything. He wanted to get back to the cabin to examine the hard drive in private. There was also an unsettling feeling growing in the pit of his stomach, a sense that they'd stumbled onto something dangerous. Their return journey was more urgent than their outbound trek. Nathan set a brisk pace, helping Lily over difficult terrain when necessary. Shadow ranged ahead and behind them, more alert than usual, as if he too sensed a shift in circumstances. They reached the cabin just as dusk was settling. Nathan quickly secured the perimeter, checking for any signs of disturbance in their absence. Finding none, he ushered Lily inside and set about their evening routine dinner, a brief lesson, review preparation for bed. All the while, the hard drive sat in his pack, a mystery waiting to be solved. After Lily was asleep, Nathan retrieved his old military laptop, a rugged model he kept for emergencies. The cabin had minimal electricity, powered by a small solar array and battery bank, but it was enough for his needs. He connected to the satellite internet service he maintained for emergencies and Lily's online lessons. The hard drive connected easily enough, but accessing its contents proved more challenging. The screen immediately filled with a complex security interface, military-grade encryption with multiple layers of defense. A simple password prompt was the first gate, but beyond it, Nathan could see prompts for biometric data security tokens and multi-factor authentication codes. Hours passed as he attempted various bypass methods, drawing on skills acquired during his military service. Nothing worked. The system was impenetrable, designed by experts to keep secrets and doing its job perfectly. Frustration mounting, and Nathan leaned back in his chair, running a hand through his hair. Shadow, who had been sleeping at his feet, raised his head and whined softly, sensing his master's distress. Nathan returned to the pilot's name, Weber. He tried various combinations. Weber's ranked possible service numbers, birthdays. Nothing worked. The cursor continued its mocking blink. He thought back to the crash site, mentally cataloging everything he'd seen. There had to be something he missed, some clue to unlocking this digital fortress. Then he remembered something, a small, thin metal tag, like a dog tag but smaller, that had fallen from the cockpit during his search. He'd pocketed it absently. Now he retrieved it, examining it under the desk lamp. Engraved on its surface was a cryptic sequence, A1Z26KR18. It wasn't a standard military identification. It looked like a cipher. A1Z26, an elementary substitution cipher where A equals 1Z equals 26. So the sequence translated to ZKR18. He tried entering it as a password. Nothing. He stared at the tag again. There was something familiar about the format, something that tugged at his memory from his intelligence briefings. Then it hit him. It wasn't just a password. It was a key combination that needed a date, a standard protocol for certain classified operations. But what date? He tried today's date, then the date they found the wreckage. Still nothing. Nathan closed his eyes, thinking. Weber had gone to extraordinary lengths to protect this information. The date would be significant, something meaningful to the pilot personally or to the mission. He reopened his examination of the cockpit in his mind. The flight suit? There had been something sewn into the collar. Nathan had noticed it but dismissed it as standard military identification. What if it wasn't? He reached for his pack, retrieving a small notebook where he jotted down observations at the crash site. Among his notes was a scribbled sequence from the collar tag 0702019. July 1st, 2019, just over 6 years ago. With renewed hope, Nathan entered the complete sequence ZKR18 07ABN219. For a heart-stopping moment, nothing happened. The blinking cursor continued its relentless pulse. He felt a surge of disappointment, then with a soft click, the screen changed. The complex matrix of security prompts vanished, replaced by a simple, clean file directory. He was in. A wave of relief washed over him, followed immediately by focused concentration. The directory was meticulously organized with folders labeled with military precision, manifest communications, logistics intelligence. His hands moved to the first folder, opening it to reveal its contents. It was a shipping manifest detailing a transfer of what was listed as surplus military hardware. But as he read further, a cold dread began to seep into his bones. The equipment wasn't surplus. It was state-of-the-art weaponry, surface-to-air missiles, advanced sniper rifles, encrypted communication gear. The destination was listed as a secure U.S. military base in Germany, but as Nathan examined the routing codes and transfer protocols with his trained eye, he could see they were falsified expertly, disguised to look legitimate but wrong in subtle, critical ways. He opened the communications folder next. It contained encrypted audio logs. A decryption key in a separate text file allowed him to run the program, And a woman's voice, cold, crisp, and laced with unmistakable authority, filled the small cabin. She spoke in coded language, but the meaning was terrifyingly clear. She was discussing prices, delivery windows, and plausible deniability with a man whose accent was distinctly Eastern European. The final folder intelligence contained a single password-protected video file. The password field had a hint: the fallen eagle's name. Weber, the pilot's name, worked. The video flickered to life on the screen. It showed a covertly recorded meeting in a lavish modern office. The same woman from the audio logs was seated behind a large glass desk, late 40s, with sharp, intelligent features, impeccably styled dark hair, and eyes cold and hard as polished steel. A small nameplate on her desk read, Victoria Maxwell, CEO, Aegis Defense Solutions. Nathan knew the name. Aegis was one of the largest private military contractors in the world, a corporate giant with immense political influence and billions in government contracts. In the video, Maxwell was finalizing a deal, the same deal from the manifests and communications. She was selling advanced American weapons to a known terrorist network, a group responsible for attacks that had killed American soldiers. Nathan felt physically ill. This wasn't just a crime, it was high treason, a betrayal paid for with the blood of men and women who had sworn the same oath he had. His mind flashed to his final mission in Afghanistan, the ambush that had killed his team. The intelligence report had mentioned advanced weapons not typically seen in the region. Could it be the timing aligned? The weapons described in the manifest matched those used in the ambush. The cold realization washed over him: his team might have died because of Maxwell's treasonous enterprise. Weber must have discovered the truth and tried to expose it, a heroic act that had cost him his life. The helicopter crash was no accident. It was an assassination disguised as a tragic mishap, the aircraft deliberately stripped of identification to complicate any investigation. What Nathan couldn't know, was that the hard drive was a trap. The moment he successfully bypassed the first layer of security, a tiny, deeply embedded program executed its one and only function. It sent a single, infinitesimally small data packet through the satellite connection, a digital flare containing his IP address. The trap had been sprung silently and invisibly. Shadow's sudden alertness pulled Nathan from his dark thoughts. The dog's ears perked up, head cocked to one side, listening intently. Then he bolted to the front door, hackles raised, a deep growl building in his chest. Nathan's combat instincts kicked in immediately. He shut down the laptop, plunging the cabin into darkness except for the faint moonlight filtering through the windows. Moving silently to Lily's room, he gently woke her, placing a finger to his lips to signal silence. Her eyes widened with immediate understanding. They had practiced emergency protocols as routinely as fire drills. Without a word, she slipped from her bed, already dressed in the clothes Nathan insisted she wear to sleep, just in case. He guided her to the hidden panic room he had built behind her closet, a reinforced space with emergency supplies, communication equipment, and a concealed exit tunnel that led to a hidden point in the woods 50 yards from the cabin. Another precaution most would call paranoid, but Nathan called preparation. "You remember what to do," he whispered, his voice barely audible. Lily nodded, her face pale but composed. "Stay here with Shadow. If I don't come back in 15 minutes, use this." He pressed a satellite phone into her small hands, along with a folded paper containing a single number. Marcus Reynolds, his former intelligence specialist from his recon team, the only teammate who hadn't been on that final mission, the only friend he still maintained contact with. Shadow whined softly, reluctant to leave Nathan's side, torn between two duties: protect the man, protect the child. Nathan gave a hand signal, and the dog's training overrode his hesitation. He moved to Lily's side, positioning his body between her and the hidden door. Nathan retrieved his pistol from the locked cabinet beside his bed, checking it with practiced efficiency. The rifle would be too unwieldy for close quarters. He moved to the front window, staying in the shadows, and peered out into the darkness. At first, he saw nothing but the familiar outline of trees and the clearing around the cabin. Then movement caught his eye, shadows moving with purpose, too deliberate to be wildlife. 3. No, 4 figures approaching from different directions, using the trees for cover. Their movements were tactical, coordinated, not hunters, not locals. Professional. His mind raced. How had they found him? Then it hit him: the hard drive. It must have had some kind of tracking or alert system embedded in it. He'd walked right into a trap. There was no time for regret. Nathan positioned himself behind the heavy oak table, overturning it to create cover. He had seconds, maybe minutes, before they breached the cabin. The first attack came as a battering ram against the front door, a heavy thud that made the wood groan but didn't break it. Nathan had reinforced all entry points years ago, another precaution that now bought precious time. The second impact splintered the doorframe. Simultaneously, glass shattered as a rifle butt smashed through a side window. Nathan didn't wait. He fired two controlled shots through the broken window, hearing a sharp cry from outside that told him he'd found his mark. But he was under no illusions. These were professionals equipped with tactical gear, night vision, and automatic weapons. He had a pistol with limited ammunition in a cabin that, while sturdy, was far from bulletproof. The goal wasn't to win, it was to survive long enough for Lily to escape. He needed to create a diversion to draw attention away from the hidden room where she waited with Shadow. Gunfire tore through the thin wooden walls, chewing up the space where he had been moments before. Nathan rolled to his right, returning fire in controlled bursts. He worked his way toward the back of the cabin, staying low, using furniture for cover. The front door finally gave way under a third assault, and dark figures poured in. Nathan fired again, forcing them to take cover, then made his move. He smashed the back window with his pistol butt and fired several rounds into the darkness outside, creating the illusion he was escaping that way. Then he doubled back through the kitchen, slipped into the narrow crawlspace access he'd built into the pantry floor, and pulled the concealed hatch closed above him. The space connected to a drainage pipe that ran beneath the cabin and emerged in a dry creek bed 30 yards away, his own escape route separate from Lily's. As he crawled through the tight space, he could hear the chaos above, shouted commands, heavy boots on wooden floors, the systematic search of each room. His diversion had worked. They were focused on the back window, believing he'd fled that way. Emerging from the drainage pipe, Nathan stayed low, using the dry creek bed for cover as he circled back toward the woods. From this vantage point, he could see the cabin fully, and what he saw froze his blood. A black helicopter running without lights was landing in the clearing beyond the cabin. It wasn't military, it had no markings at all, just like the downed Apache. As he watched a figure emerge from the helicopter and walked with confident purpose toward the cabin. Even in the darkness, Nathan recognized her from the video. Victoria Maxwell herself had come to oversee the operation. This wasn't just about retrieving leaked information. This was personal. He heard her voice carrying in the night air as she spoke to the leader of the tactical team. "Find that hard drive at any cost," she ordered coldly, "and leave no survivors." The words sent ice through Nathan's veins. These weren't just mercenaries sent to recover stolen data. They were assassins with orders to eliminate witnesses, including a 9-year-old girl. Rage surged through him, but he forced it down. Emotion would get them killed. He needed to think, to use every skill 15 years in Force Recon had taught him. His first priority was clear: get back to Lily and Shadow. Ensure they were safely away from the cabin. The panic room was designed to be undetectable, but against a thorough search by professionals, it might eventually be discovered. Nathan moved silently through the underbrush, using every scrap of cover available. He approached the hidden exit of the panic room tunnel, a hollowed-out log that concealed the narrow opening. To his relief, it remained undisturbed. Lily had followed his instructions perfectly: stay put, unless the 15-minute mark passed. He slipped into the tunnel, crawling quickly toward the panic room. When he reached the hidden door, he tapped out the recognition pattern they had practiced: 3 soft knocks, a pause, then 2 more. The door opened a crack. Shadow's amber eye visible in the darkness. Then Lily's face appeared. The relief in her eyes nearly broke him. "They're going to burn the cabin," he whispered. "We need to move now. Remember our deep woods protocol?" Lily nodded, her small face set with determination that belied her age. She had already packed the emergency backpack, water, energy bars, first aid kit, extra ammunition, the satellite phone, and a thermal blanket. Nothing unnecessary, nothing that would slow them down. Nathan felt a surge of pride through his fear. She was her father's daughter. Shadow led the way as they moved deeper into the forest, away from the cabin and the men hunting them. The dog's senses were their early warning system, his training allowing him to detect approaching threats long before human ears or eyes could. They hadn't gone 200 yards when an orange glow lit up the night behind them. Nathan turned to see flames engulfing the cabin, their home for the past 3 years, disappearing in a hungry blaze. He felt a momentary pang. Sarah's photographs, Lily's drawings, the physical remnants of their life together, but suppressed it immediately. Things could be replaced, Liv's couldn't. The fire served their purpose, though it would destroy any evidence they'd survived any trail they might have left. The mercenaries would search the surrounding area, but in the vast wilderness of the Appalachians, finding three fugitives who knew the terrain intimately would be nearly impossible. Nathan set a course east away from established trails, moving at a pace Lily could maintain. His shoulder throbbed where a bullet had grazed him during the firefight, a fact he kept from Lily, but the wound wasn't serious. Shadow ranged ahead and behind them, constantly alert for pursuers. As they moved through the darkened forest, Nathan's mind worked furiously. The hard drive was in his pack, he hadn't left it behind. It was their only evidence of Maxwell's treason, the only proof of what had happened to Weber, and possibly to his own team. But it was also what had brought killers to their door, what had put Lily in danger. The weight of responsibility pressed down on him. He'd always believed isolation was protection, that withdrawing from the world would keep Lily safe. Now he realized his mistake. There was no hiding from people like Maxwell. Their reach was too long, their resources too vast. The only safety lay in bringing the truth to light, in finding allies powerful enough to stand against Maxwell's influence. But who could they trust? The hard drive contained evidence that someone high in military command was complicit in Maxwell's operation. Going to the wrong authorities could be a death sentence. As dawn approached, they reached a ridgeline that offered a view of the valley below. In the far distance, the orange glow of their burning cabin was still visible, a small star of destruction in the vast darkness of the mountains. Lily stood beside him, her small hand finding his. "What do we do now, Dad?" Her voice was steady, trusting. Despite everything, she believed in him, believed he would keep her safe. Nathan squeezed her hand gently. The path ahead was dangerous, uncertain. They were being hunted by killers with seemingly unlimited resources. They had lost their home, their sanctuary, but they were still together, still alive. And they had the truth, a weapon more powerful than any in Maxwell's arsenal, if they could get it to the right people. "We find a way to fight back," he answered softly. "We make sure Captain Weber didn't die for nothing." As the first light of dawn broke over the mountains, Nathan, Lily, and Shadow disappeared into the forest, three small figures against the vast wilderness. Behind them, the ruins of their old life smoldered. Ahead lay a dangerous journey toward an uncertain justice. But they moved forward together, bound by love, trust, and a determination that even the most powerful forces of corruption would find difficult to extinguish. Night swallowed the mountains, a darkness so complete that it seemed to devour sound itself. Nathan led Lily and Shadow deeper into the wilderness, pushing steadily eastward through terrain few people ever ventured into. Every step carried them farther from the smoldering ruins of their cabin, from the life they'd built in isolation that had proven insufficient protection after all. The bullet graze on Nathan's shoulder burned with each movement, but he forced the pain away, compartmentalizing it as he'd been trained to do. Lily hadn't complained once, despite the grueling pace and the terror of watching their home burn. She moved with quiet determination, her small face set in concentration, occasionally reaching for his hand when the terrain grew treacherous. They traveled through the night, stopping only when necessary for Lily to rest. Nathan kept them off any established trails, choosing instead to follow game paths and natural features that wouldn't appear on standard maps. Shadow ranged ahead and behind his senses, alert for any sign of pursuit. Twice the dog froze, hackles raised, staring back the way they'd come, but each time the threat, real or perceived, passed without materializing. Dawn broke with cold clarity, painting the eastern sky in pale gold. Nathan found a defensible position beneath an overhanging rock formation, sheltered from view on three sides. He settled Lily there, wrapping her in the thermal blanket from her pack. Nathan knelt beside her, examining her face in the growing light. Exhaustion shadowed her eyes, but there was something else there too, a steel that shouldn't exist in a 9-year-old, a resolve born of necessity. In that moment, looking at his daughter's face, Nathan felt both immense pride and crushing guilt. This was never the childhood he and Sarah had planned for her. Lily reached up her small fingers, brushing his bearded cheek. The simple gesture of comfort, the child consoling the parent, nearly broke him. He'd tried so hard to shield her from the harshness of the world, only to bring danger directly to their doorstep. While Lily slept, Nathan checked their supplies and planned their next move. The satellite phone was their lifeline, now their only connection to potential help. He powered it on briefly, careful to keep the connection time minimal to avoid possible tracking. He had one call to make to the only person he still trusted. Marcus Reynolds answered on the third ring, his voice thick with sleep. Nathan kept the conversation cryptic but urgent, using pre-established code phrases from their deployment days. A meeting point, a timeline, a warning about the level of threat. Marcus absorbed it all without question, responding with terse acknowledgement. That was the thing about the bonds forged in combat, they didn't require explanations. Nathan ended the call and immediately removed the battery from the phone. It wasn't a foolproof security measure, but it might buy them some time if Maxwell's people were sophisticated enough to track the signal. He let Lily sleep for 2 more hours while he kept watch, his mind working through contingencies. The hard drive weighed heavily in his pack, physically light, but carrying the gravitational pull of dangerous truth. Nathan had no illusions about what they were up against. Victoria Maxwell wasn't just a CEO, she was a kingmaker with connections throughout the military-industrial complexes and government. The kind of person who could make people disappear with a phone call. When Lily woke, they ate sparingly from their limited supplies. Nathan studied the topographical map he carried, tracing their route to the rendezvous point with Marcus. Eagle Mountain, a prominent peak 15 miles northeast. The terrain between was challenging, especially for a child, but Nathan knew Lily was tougher than she looked. She'd have to be. They moved out as the morning mist began to lift from the valleys below. Shadow taking point. The dog's behavior had shifted subtly since the attack. He was more vigilant, more focused, as if he understood that this wasn't a training exercise or a hunting trip. This was survival. The day stretched into a rhythm of careful movement, periodic rest, and constant vigilance. Nathan pointed out edible plants to Lily as they traveled, continuing her education even now. She absorbed the information with quiet intensity, asking intelligent questions that revealed her growing understanding of their situation. She knew they weren't simply running. They were fighting back in the only way they could right now. By mid-afternoon, dark clouds gathered over the mountains, and the first fat raindrops began to fall. Nathan found shelter beneath a rock outcropping as the skies opened up. The sudden downpour was both blessing and curse. It would obscure their trail, but it also made travel more dangerous in the steep terrain. As they waited out the worst of the storm, Nathan checked his wound. The bleeding had stopped, but angry red streaks radiated from the gash, the beginning of infection. Without proper medical supplies, it would only worsen. Another reason to reach Marcus quickly. Lily noticed his grimace as he rebandaged the wound with a strip torn from his undershirt. Her eyes widened with concern, but she didn't panic. Instead, she rummaged through her pack and produced a small tin, the wild herb salve Sarah had taught her to make years ago. The sight of it, this connection to her mother's knowledge, created a lump in Nathan's throat that he struggled to swallow past. The storm passed as quickly as it had arrived, leaving the forest dripping and the air heavy with the scent of wet earth. They continued their journey, making slower progress on the slick terrain. By Nathan's calculation, they still had at least 10 miles to Eagle Mountain, and the daylight was waning. They would need to travel through another night. As dusk approached, Shadow's behavior changed. The dog stopped suddenly, ears forward, body rigid with alertness. Nathan immediately pulled Lily behind a large tree, scanning the surrounding forest. For several minutes, they remained motionless, barely breathing. Then they heard it, the distant mechanical buzz that didn't belong in these mountains. A drone. The sound grew closer, and Nathan caught glimpses of it through the canopy, a small black shape moving with purpose, its camera sweeping the forest below. They pressed themselves against the massive trunk of an ancient oak, using its broad girth as cover. The drone hovered nearby for what felt like an eternity, then continued its search pattern, moving away to the west. Maxwell was deploying technology, now expanding the search. It was only a matter of time before she brought in more men, more resources. The mountains were vast, but not infinite. Eventually they would be found unless they reached safety. They pushed on as night fell, using the darkness as cover. Nathan carried Lily when the terrain grew too difficult or when her energy flagged. His shoulder screamed in protest, but he ignored it. Shadow stayed close now, no longer ranging ahead, but keeping within sight, as if sensing that separation would be dangerous. Near midnight, they crested a ridge and caught their first glimpse of Eagle Mountain, its distinctive profile silhouetted against the star-filled sky. They were still several hours away, but the sight gave them renewed purpose. Nathan allowed them a brief rest, sharing the last of their water. Lily leaned against him, her small body warm against his side, a reminder of everything at stake. The final approach to the rendezvous point was the most exposed part of their journey. Eagle Mountain's summit was above the tree line, and the meeting place Marcus had confirmed was a fire observation tower near the peak. They would be visible during the final ascent, vulnerable to aerial surveillance. Nathan timed their approach carefully, reaching the base of the exposed slope just before dawn. They would make the final climb in the dim light of early morning when shadows were longest and drone operations might be less effective. It was a calculated risk, but staying in the forest meant missing the rendezvous, and they couldn't afford that luxury. The climb was arduous. Nathan's infected wound throbbed with every heartbeat, and fatigue had settled into his bones like lead. Lily stumbled more frequently now, dark circles under her eyes testifying to her exhaustion. Even Shadow moved with less fluid grace, his tongue lolling as he panted in the thin mountain air. They were 3/4 of the way up when Shadow froze, growling low in his throat. Nathan scanned the sky, expecting to see a drone, but instead spotted the black silhouette of a helicopter far to the west near where their cabin had been. It was too distant to be an immediate threat, but its presence confirmed his fears. The search was intensifying. The observation tower appeared as they crested the final rise, a weathered wooden structure standing like a lonely sentinel against the vast sky, and beside it, parked on the small service road that wound up the opposite side of the mountain, was a familiar battered Jeep. Marcus stood waiting, rifle held casually but ready, his weathered face breaking into relief as he spotted them. He was a solid presence, built like the mountains themselves, barrel-chested and immovable. His close-cropped gray hair and deep-set eyes gave him the appearance of a man carved from granite, someone who had seen too much but remained standing nonetheless. The reunion was brief, wordless. No time for lengthy explanations or emotional displays. Marcus checked Nathan's wound with a grimace, then guided them to the Jeep. Within minutes, they were descending the mountain on the narrow service road, heading away from the helicopter Nathan had spotted. Only when they were back below the tree line, the Jeep bouncing along the rough forest service road, did Marcus speak. Nathan explained everything: finding the helicopter, discovering the hard drive, the attack on their cabin, Maxwell's direct involvement. Marcus listened without interruption, his hands tight on the steering wheel, his expression darkening with each new detail. When Nathan mentioned the weapons shipments and the possible connection to their team's ambush in Afghanistan, Marcus's knuckles turned white. The attack that had killed their teammates had haunted both of them for years. The possibility that it wasn't just bad intelligence or enemy action, but American weapons deliberately sold to the enemy, struck at the core of everything they had fought for. Marcus drove them deep into the national forest, following unmarked fire roads, and eventually turning onto what appeared to be a game trail, but was just wide enough for the Jeep. After nearly 2 hours of driving, they arrived at a small hunting cabin nestled in a secluded hollow. It was rustic but solid, built to withstand the harsh mountain winters. Inside the cabin was sparse but well-equipped, a wood stove, basic furniture shelves stocked with supplies. Marcus had clearly prepared for their arrival, or perhaps he always kept the place ready for emergencies. Either way, Nathan felt the first small measure of safety since finding Weber's helicopter. While Lily slept on a narrow cot in the corner, Marcus treated Nathan's wound properly, cleaning it thoroughly and applying antibiotics from a well-stocked first aid kit. The infection hadn't progressed too far, and with proper care, it would heal. Shadow lay beside Lily's cot, his eyes following the men's movements, but his body positioned protectively near the child. Marcus connected the hard drive to his own laptop, and together they examined its contents more thoroughly. The evidence was damning, not just the weapons sales Nathan had already discovered, but a complex network of illegal operations spanning years. Maxwell had been systematically diverting American military hardware to various conflict zones around the world, profiting from both the legitimate government contracts to supply the weapons and the black market sales to insurgents. The corrupted system log file Nathan had only glanced at contained more than he'd initially realized. Marcus, with his intelligence background, recognized it as a navigation log, the Apache's flight record from its final mission. Most of it was unreadable, damaged in the crash, but one entry remained intact, a string of numbers that Marcus identified as GPS coordinates. Marcus plotted the location on a topographical map. The coordinates pointed to a location deep in the George Washington and Jefferson National Forest near a prominent waterfall. It wasn't far from where they'd found Weber's crashed helicopter, perhaps 10 miles as the crow flew, but much farther through the challenging mountain terrain. Why would Weber have these coordinates in his system? Was it a random navigational waypoint or something more significant? Nathan recalled Weber's careful preparation, the hidden compartment, the encrypted hard drive. Nothing about the man seemed random or coincidental. As they discussed theories, a sudden noise outside the cabin froze them both. Shadow was instantly alert, a low growl rumbling in his chest. Marcus moved to the window with practiced stealth peering through a narrow gap in the curtains. His body tensed and he gestured for Nathan to get down. Headlights swept across the trees as a vehicle approached along the same trail they had used. Marcus doused the cabin's lantern, plunging the interior into darkness broken only by the faint blue glow of the laptop screen. Nathan moved silently to Lily, placing a hand gently over her mouth as he woke her. Her eyes flew open, but she remained still when she saw his expression. Nathan guided her to a trapdoor hidden beneath a rug. Another escape route, another contingency. Marcus's paranoia matched his own, a shared trait from their years in special operations. Always have a way out, never get cornered. Shadow followed them down into a small root cellar as Marcus gathered essential supplies, including the hard drive. The sound of vehicles stopping outside grew louder. Multiple doors slammed. Voices called out commands. They had been found. Marcus joined them in the cellar, pulling the trap door closed above them. He led them through a narrow tunnel, dirt-walled and low-ceilinged, forcing them to crouch as they moved. It extended perhaps 30 yards before opening into a dry creek bed, a safe distance from the cabin. They emerged just as gunfire erupted behind them. Through the trees, they could see flashlight beams sweeping the cabin's interior. Marcus didn't hesitate. He pointed them toward a dense thicket of rhododendron, then turned back toward the cabin. Nathan grabbed his arm. Marcus shook his head. There was no discussion to be had. Someone needed to create a diversion to buy time for Nathan and Lily to escape. Marcus had made his choice. He pressed a set of keys into Nathan's palm and nodded once before disappearing back into the tunnel. Nathan wanted to follow to help his friend fight, but Lily's presence beside him was a visceral reminder of his primary responsibility. He led her into the rhododendron thicket, Shadow close behind. They had barely reached cover when more gunfire erupted, this time from outside the cabin, Marcus engaging the intruders from a different position than they would expect. The diversion worked. Shouts of alarm rose as the mercenaries redirected their attention toward the new threat. Nathan used the chaos to guide Lily deeper into the forest, moving parallel to another service road Marcus had pointed out on their arrival. They had gone perhaps half a mile when the night was suddenly illuminated by a massive explosion. The shockwave rolled through the trees and a column of fire rose into the sky behind them. Nathan's heart sank. Marcus had triggered some kind of failsafe, destroying the cabin and hopefully any pursuers with it. But the cost? There was no time to mourn. Nathan used the keys Marcus had given him to access a small ATV hidden beneath a camouflage tarp near the service road. It wasn't ideal. The engine noise would make them easier to track, but they needed distance more than stealth now. With Lily seated in front of him and Shadow somehow balancing his substantial weight on the small rear platform, Nathan started the engine and headed deeper into the national forest. They traveled through the remainder of the night, the ATV's headlight illuminating just enough of the trail ahead to navigate safely. By dawn, they had covered nearly 40 miles of rugged terrain. The forest had changed character around them, the mixed hardwoods giving way to stands of pine and hemlock as they climbed to higher elevations. Nathan finally stopped at a small stream to refill their water supply and allow Lily and Shadow to rest. The ATV's fuel gauge showed half a tank, remaining enough to reach the coordinates if the trails remained passable. Nathan studied the map Marcus had marked before their hasty departure. The waterfall was deep in the most remote section of the national forest, an area so rugged that few hikers ever ventured there. As Lily slept briefly beside the stream, Nathan pondered their situation. Marcus's sacrifice had bought them time, but Maxwell's resources seemed endless. How long before more mercenaries picked up their trail, before drones spotted the ATV from above? They needed to reach the waterfall, discover what Weber had hidden there, and find a way to get the evidence to someone who could use it effectively against Maxwell. But who? The hard drive had revealed that Maxwell's network extended into the highest levels of military command. Going to the wrong authorities could be a death sentence. They needed someone outside the traditional power structures, someone with both the courage and the platform to expose Maxwell regardless of the consequences. Lily stirred her eyes, opening with immediate awareness of their surroundings. a child learning survival far too young. She sat up looking at Nathan with quiet assessment. Her resilience both amazed and terrified him. No child should have to be this strong, this adaptable to danger. They continued their journey as the day warmed around them. The ATV allowed them to cover ground quickly following old logging roads and fire breaks through the increasingly wild terrain. Shadow ran alongside them when the trail was clear enough, his powerful legs eating up the distance with seemingly tireless energy. By mid-afternoon, they began to hear the distant thunder of falling water, growing progressively louder as they approached the coordinates. The trail became too steep and narrow for the ATV, forcing them to continue on foot for the final mile. Nathan concealed the vehicle as best he could, knowing they might need it for their escape. The waterfall was magnificent, a 100-foot curtain of white water plunging into a deep emerald pool, sending a perpetual mist into the air that created rainbows in the afternoon sunlight. Under different circumstances, it would have been a moment of wonder, a father showing his daughter one of nature's spectacles. Now it was simply another waypoint in their desperate flight. Nathan consulted the GPS unit Marcus had included with the keys. They were at the correct coordinates, but there was no obvious sign of anything unusual. No marker, no cache, nothing to indicate why Weber had logged this location. Shadow, however, had other ideas. The dog began sniffing along the base of the cliff beside the waterfall, his behavior growing more excited as he moved. Suddenly, Shadow began pawing at a section of rock face that was almost completely hidden behind a thick curtain of ferns and moss. Nathan pushed aside the vegetation to reveal a narrow fissure in the rock barely wide enough for an adult to squeeze through. A cool draft of air flowed out from the opening, carrying the scent of wet stone and ancient earth. This had to be it. Nathan retrieved a small flashlight from his pack, instructed Lily to stay close, and led them into the darkness. The fissure opened into a cave, not deep but spacious, a single chamber at the high ceiling. Water dripped somewhere in the darkness, a rhythmic counterpoint to their cautious footsteps. In the center of the chamber, placed carefully on a flat rock, was a black waterproof case. Nathan approached it slowly, sweeping the flashlight around the cave to ensure they were alone. The case was military-grade, designed to withstand extreme conditions, with heavy-duty latches securing the lid. Nathan knelt and opened it, revealing its precious contents. On one side lay a thick stack of documents, each sheet sealed in a waterproof sleeve, original, hard copies of the information contained on the digital drive. Manifest communications transcripts, internal memos, signed by Maxwell herself. On the other side was a small, ruggedized memory card labeled video evidence, identical to the one in his possession, but presumably a backup. Beneath these was a final item, a thick, vacuum-sealed envelope. Nathan carefully opened it to find a handwritten letter from Weber and a folded laminated map of the local region. He read the letter, his expression growing more solemn with each line. "If you're reading this, I'm already dead. Maxwell discovered I was compiling evidence. The crash was no accident. Don't trust the agency. Don't trust military command. Her network is everywhere. The only person I could trust is a journalist named Ben Mitchell. He knows the risks. I've hidden a satellite phone to contact him in an abandoned coal mine called the Widow's Maw. The location is marked on the map. It's my last resort. There's an escape tunnel from this cave system that leads directly into the mine. It's your only way out. Godspeed." Yum. A complete contingency plan from a man who knew he was marked for death, but was determined that his evidence would survive. Nathan studied the map, finding the marked location of the Widow's Maw, an abandoned coal mine several miles from their current position. According to Weber's markings, a tunnel system connected this cave to the mine complex, a subterranean escape route. Nathan was processing this information when Shadow's behavior suddenly changed. The dog who had been exploring the cave froze near the entrance, his body rigid with alertness. A low, menacing growl rumbled from deep in his chest, a warning sound Nathan had rarely heard from him. Nathan quickly doused the flashlight, gesturing for Lily to remain absolutely still. In the sudden darkness, their other senses heightened, and then they heard the faint scrape of a boot on stone outside the cave entrance, quickly muffled. They weren't alone anymore. A voice called from outside, confident and chilling. "I know you're in there, Winters. I have your daughter here." Nathan's blood ran cold. He reached for Lily in the darkness, his hand finding her shoulder, solid presence still beside him. The voice was lying. It was a psychological tactic, an attempt to lure him out or confirm their presence. But it meant their pursuers had found them, had somehow tracked them to the waterfall despite all their precautions. Nathan remembered Weber's escape tunnel. In the darkness, he gathered the contents of the case into his pack and whispered to Lily to follow him. They needed to find the tunnel entrance before the mercenaries stormed the cave. Guided by Shadow, whose night vision far exceeded their own, they moved toward the back of the cave, feeling along the wall for any opening. Lily's small hands proved more sensitive than his. She found at first a narrow crevice low to the ground near the rear wall. It was tight, barely large enough for an adult to squeeze through, but it was their only option. Nathan urged Lily to go first, then Shadow. He would follow the last, covering their retreat. As he prepared to enter the tunnel, he heard movement at the cave entrance. Someone was coming in. He quickly pushed a large boulder against the tunnel opening, concealing it as best he could, before slipping into the darkness after Lily and Shadow. The tunnel was a nightmare of confinement, narrow, low-ceilinged, and seemingly endless. They crawled more than walked, the beam of Nathan's flashlight providing their only illumination. The air grew stale and cold, thick with the smell of minerals and earth. Water dripped constantly from the ceiling, soaking through their clothes. Lily never complained, never hesitated, moving forward with the quiet determination that continued to amaze Nathan. Shadow led the way, his light-colored coat occasionally visible in the darkness ahead, when Nathan's flashlight beam caught it. After what seemed like hours, but was probably less than one, the tunnel abruptly widened, opening into a much larger passage. They could stand upright now, and the character of the space changed dramatically. The natural stone walls gave way to timber supports and the unmistakable signs of human excavation. They had reached the Widow's Maw coal mine. The mine was a labyrinth, a disorienting maze of tunnels branching in all directions. Nathan consulted Weber's map, trying to orient themselves in the underground complex. According to the markings, the maintenance station where the satellite phone was hidden should be near a large central chamber that served as the mine's hub. They moved cautiously through the abandoned tunnels, alert for any signs of pursuit. The mine was eerily silent except for the distant drip of water and the occasional settling of ancient timbers. Their flashlight beam revealed rusty equipment and collapsed sections of tunnel, reminders of how dangerous their surroundings were. Nathan's infected shoulder throbbed with renewed intensity, the exertion and stress taking their toll. Fever had begun to set in, bringing with it waves of dizziness that he fought to control. He couldn't falter now, not when they were so close to their goal. Shadow suddenly stopped, his ears pricked forward, body tense with alertness. Nathan and Lily froze, listening intently. At first there was nothing, then they heard it, faint echoes of movement from somewhere in the mine complex. Their pursuers had found the tunnel entrance and followed them into the Widow's Maw. They quickened their pace, following Weber's map through the maze-like passages. The sounds behind them grew louder, multiple pursuers now coordinating their movements through the mine. Nathan's mind raced. The maintenance station was their only hope, their only chance to contact Ben Mitchell and get the evidence out before Maxwell's people caught them. After several wrong turns and backtracking, they finally found a small, brick-walled room deep in the mine that had once served as a maintenance and tool storage area. Nathan swept the flashlight around the space, revealing workbenches covered in dust and rusted tools hanging from pegs on the wall. And there, tucked inside a toolbox, exactly as Weber's letter had described, was the satellite phone. Nathan powered it on with trembling hands, praying it still functioned after years in the damp mine. The screen flickered to life, the battery indicator showing a nearly full charge. Weber had thought of everything using a low-power mode to preserve the battery. There was a single number programmed into the phone's memory: Ben Mitchell. Nathan dialed, his heart pounding as he waited. 1 ring, 2, 3. The echoing sounds of their pursuers grew closer. Shadow growled softly, facing the doorway, hackles raised. Finally, a voice answered, cautious, guarded. Nathan spoke rapidly, introducing himself and explaining his connection to Weber. Mitchell's response was immediate, his voice shifting from skepticism to urgent focus as Nathan described the evidence they had discovered. Nathan began transmitting the critical files from Weber's backup memory card, using the satellite phone's data connection to send the most damning evidence to Mitchell. The journalist confirmed receipt of the first files, his voice tightening with recognition of their significance. But their time had run out. Shadow's growl deepened, and the sound of approaching footsteps echoed in the corridor outside the maintenance room. Nathan whispered urgent instructions to Mitchell, their location, the nature of the threat, a plea for immediate help, then ended the transmission and hid the phone in Lily's pack. If they were captured, perhaps she would be overlooked long enough to complete the call. Nathan positioned himself between the doorway and Lily, his pistol drawn. Shadow stood beside him, a living barrier of muscle and teeth ready to defend his family. They waited in tense silence as the footsteps drew nearer, echoing off the stone walls of the mine. A beam of light swept the corridor outside, then a figure appeared in the doorway, tall, elegant, completely out of place in the rugged mine setting. Victoria Maxwell stood before them, flanked by two mercenaries with rifles aimed at Nathan's chest. She looked exactly as she had in the video, her expensive clothing now supplemented with practical tactical gear, her cold eyes assessing the situation with calculated precision. Maxwell's gaze moved from Nathan to Lily, then to the pack containing Weber's evidence. A small, satisfied smile curved her lips. She had found her prey, cornered them in this underground tomb, and now she would reclaim what they had stolen from her. The confrontation that would determine their fate had begun. The silence in the maintenance room felt like a physical weight pressing down on them all. Victoria Maxwell stood in the doorway, power and menace radiating from her slender frame despite her elegant appearance. The two mercenaries flanking her kept their rifles trained on Nathan, their eyes cold and professional beneath tactical helmets. Maxwell stepped forward, her expensive boots making no sound on the dusty mine floor. Her gaze swept over Nathan, taking in his exhausted state, the fever-bright eyes, the protective stance in front of Lily. There was something almost admiring in her assessment, quickly replaced by calculated indifference. A triumphant smile played at the corners of her mouth. An admirable effort, Sergeant Winters. Not many people could survive a mine collapse, much less while protecting a child. Your reputation for resourcefulness was clearly not exaggerated. Nathan's mind raced, cataloging their limited options. The maintenance room had only one entrance, now blocked by Maxwell and her men. Even if he could somehow overcome the immediate threat, they were deep underground in an unfamiliar labyrinth. His fever was worsening, his strength ebbing with each passing minute. Behind him, Lily pressed close to Shadow, her small hand buried in the dog's thick fur. The animal remained perfectly still, muscles coiled and ready, waiting for Nathan's command. Even now, facing overwhelming odds, Shadow's loyalty never wavered. Maxwell's eyes flickered to the backpack containing Weber's evidence. I believe you have something that belongs to me. The hard drive, the documents, all of it. Hand them over and perhaps I'll consider letting your daughter live. The threat against Lily ignited something primal in Nathan's chest, a rage so pure it momentarily burned away the fever's fog. His grip tightened on his pistol, though he knew firing would be suicide. Maxwell's mercenaries would cut him down before he could get off a second shot. Maxwell caught the flash of fury in his eyes and actually laughed, a soft, cultured sound, utterly incongruous in the dank mine corridor. Don't be foolish, Sergeant. You're outnumbered, injured, and trapped. There's no scenario where violence ends well for your daughter. She was right, and the knowledge tasted like ash in Nathan's mouth. He needed time and needed a plan. His eyes darted around the maintenance room, searching for anything that might help them. You sold weapons to the people who killed my team in Afghanistan. Nathan's voice was a raw scrape of emotion, each word pulled from somewhere deep and wounded. American weapons. You betrayed your country, betrayed men and women who trusted the system you corrupted. Something flickered across Maxwell's face, not guilt, but annoyance at being challenged. For money, that's just a small part of the bigger picture. This is about power, about shaping the world as we see fit. Those weapons fuel conflicts, and conflicts fuel demand for our services. It's a perfect cycle. The cold pragmatism of her response stunned Nathan. This wasn't just corruption. It was a fundamental perversion of everything he'd fought for, everything Weber had died to expose. Maxwell wasn't simply profiting from war. She was deliberately perpetuating it, creating the very instability that made her services indispensable. Maxwell stepped closer, her patience clearly waning. Enough discussion, the hard drive and documents. Now. Nathan weighed his options, desperately playing for time. And then, what? You kill us anyway. Leave our bodies down here for the rats. I'm a businesswoman, Sergeant, not a monster. Give me what I want, and you both walk out of here. You have my word. The lie was seamless, delivered with practiced sincerity that might have fooled someone who hadn't seen the evidence of her treachery. As if on cue, a distant rumble echoed through the mine, followed by the sound of falling rock. Both mercenaries glanced nervously at the ceiling dust, sifting down from the ancient support beams. Maxwell's expression didn't change, but something dangerous flickered in her eyes. She reached into her pocket and removed a small remote detonator. That was just a warning. My men have placed charges throughout the main support structures. This entire section can be collapsed with the press of a button. She held up the detonator, her thumb hovering over the trigger. You think I'd come here without a backup plan? The mine is collapsing. We'll all be buried alive unless you follow my instructions. I know an exit, Weber didn't. The ultimatum hung in the stale air between them. Nathan's fever-clouded mind struggled to process their options. If Maxwell was telling the truth about the charges, resistance meant death for all of them. If she was bluffing, before he could decide, Maxwell pressed the button. The effect was immediate and catastrophic. A series of explosions rocked the mine, each one sending shockwaves through the ancient tunnels. Support beams cracked like gunshots, and chunks of ceiling began to rain down around them. One of the mercenaries was struck by falling debris and went down hard, his rifle clattering across the floor. In the chaos, Shadow launched himself at the remaining mercenary, a gray and white missile of muscle and fury. The man screamed as powerful jaws clamped down on his gun arm, the rifle discharging harmlessly into the wall as both dog and man crashed to the ground in a violent tangle. Nathan seized the moment, tackling Maxwell before she could draw her sidearm. They hit the ground hard, the detonator spinning away across the dusty floor. Maxwell fought with surprising strength, her manicured nails raking across Nathan's face as she struggled to break free. Through the din of collapsing tunnels and the immediate struggle, Nathan heard Lily's terrified cry. He pinned Maxwell with one arm and looked up to see his daughter backing away from a massive crack that had opened in the maintenance room's wall. Water was beginning to spurt through the fissure, not just seepage, but a pressurized flow that suggested they'd breached some underground reservoir. Maxwell used his distraction to drive a knee into his injured shoulder. White-hot pain exploded through Nathan's body, momentarily paralyzing him. Maxwell scrambled away, lunging for her fallen guard's weapon. Shadow, having dispatched the first mercenary, immediately intercepted, her teeth bared in a snarl that promised violence. Maxwell froze, then slowly backed toward the doorway. This place is coming down. Her voice remained controlled despite the chaos erupting around them. Follow me, you want to live. I know the only safe exit route. Another explosion rocked the mine, closer this time. The crack in the wall widened, water now gushing into the room with alarming force. The ceiling began to sag, ancient timbers groaning under shifting weight. They had minutes, perhaps seconds, before the entire section collapsed. Dad, Lily's voice cut through the cacophony, drawing Nathan's attention to where she stood, water already swirling around her ankles. She was pointing at something, a small opening in the far corner of the room, partially hidden behind a collapsed shelving unit, an air shaft or perhaps another maintenance tunnel. Shadow barked sharply, moving toward the opening. Lily had spotted his behavior, unmistakable. The dog had found a way out. Maxwell saw it too. That tunnel's a dead end. It leads deeper into the collapse zone. Follow me or die here. She gestured toward the main corridor, her face a mask of calculated concern. Nathan looked from Maxwell to Shadow, weighing their options in the precious seconds remaining. The mercenary Shadow had attacked was struggling to his feet, blood streaming from his mangled arm. The other lay motionless beneath a fallen beam. Trust had kept Nathan alive through 2 wars and the aftermath of losing Sarah. Trust in his training, in his instincts, and above all in Shadow. The dog had never led them astray, had saved their lives multiple times since this nightmare began. Lily followed Shadow. The command left no room for argument as another section of ceiling came down between them and Maxwell. You'll die in here. Maxwell's composure finally cracked, her voice rising above the din of collapsing tunnels and rushing water. Nathan scooped up the fallen rifle and herded Lily toward the opening Shadow had indicated. The dog went first, then Lily crawling on hands and knees into the narrow passage. Nathan followed the infected wound in his shoulder, screaming in protest as he dragged himself forward. Behind them, Maxwell's furious shouts were drowned by the thunderous collapse of the maintenance room. The tunnel they'd entered was tight but passable, forcing them to crawl through near total darkness. Nathan's flashlight had been lost in the struggle, leaving them to feel their way forward, guided only by Shadow's occasional whine from up ahead. Water began seeping into the tunnel, first a trickle, then a steady flow that threatened to drown them if they didn't move faster. The sound of the mine collapsing continued around them, a hellish symphony of grinding stone and splintering wood. The tunnel seemed endless. Each yard gained a victory against exhaustion and the rising water. Nathan's fever burned hotter reality blurring at the edges of his consciousness. Only Lily's presence ahead of him kept him moving, the absolute necessity of getting her to safety, overriding his body's demand for surrender. Just when Nathan felt his strength failing completely, the tunnel widened and angled upward. Shadow's excited bark echoed back to them. He'd found something. They crawled faster, hope lending strength to their exhausted limbs. The tunnel opened abruptly into a larger passage, one that showed signs of more recent human activity, modern support beams, electrical conduit along the walls. Some kind of service or emergency tunnel, perhaps part of a newer mining operation that had intersected with the abandoned Widow's Maw. They could stand now, though Nathan had to hunch slightly to avoid hitting his head. The water level was lower here, just ankle deep, instead of the rising flood they'd left behind. Shadow led them forward with confident purpose, navigating the darkness with his superior senses. After what felt like hours but was likely only 20 minutes, Shadow stopped, his attention fixed on something ahead. A faint light penetrated the gloom, not the harsh beam of a flashlight, but the diffuse glow of daylight. An exit. They had found a way out. They moved faster now, drawn toward the promise of freedom. The light grew stronger, resolving into the unmistakable shape of a mine entrance, partially overgrown with vegetation. Fresh air flowed in, sweet and cool compared to the stale dampness they'd been breathing. They emerged into blinding sunlight, the shock of open space momentarily disorienting after so long underground. They stood on a rocky slope, the mine entrance, little more than a dark hole in the mountainside disguised by years of neglect and encroaching forest. Below them stretched miles of unbroken wilderness, the Appalachian ridges rolling away to the horizon. No signs of pursuit, no helicopters or drones visible in the clear sky. For the moment at least, they had escaped. Nathan sank to his knees, the combination of fever, exhaustion, and relief temporarily overwhelming him. Lily collapsed beside him, her small face streaked with grime and tears, but her green eyes bright with the resilience that continued to amaze him. Shadow stood guard nearby, his alert gaze scanning their surroundings for any threat. They had survived, but the danger was far from over. Maxwell might have been buried in the mine collapse, but her organization remained intact. They were still fugitives, still hunted, and the evidence they carried still needed to reach hands that could use it effectively. The satellite phone in Lily's pack had survived their ordeal. Nathan powered it on, relieved to find it still functional despite the water and rough treatment. The call to Ben Mitchell had been cut short, but the initial data transfer had gone through. The journalist knew they existed, knew something of what they carried. It was a tenuous connection, but the only ally they had left. Nathan dialed Mitchell's number again, praying the man would answer, would still be willing to help them after the abrupt termination of their previous call. The phone rang once, twice, 3 times. Nathan's hope began to fade. Then a voice answered, cautious but immediate. Nathan quickly explained their situation. The escape from the mine, Maxwell's apparent death, their desperate need for extraction from the wilderness before Maxwell's organization could regroup and find them. Mitchell's response was all business. He'd received enough of the files to understand the significance of what they carried. He had contacts in the FBI, people he trusted implicitly, who operated outside the potentially compromised chain of command that Maxwell had infiltrated. They could have a team at the mine entrance within 2 hours. All Nathan and Lily needed to do was survive until help arrived. The wait was excruciating. Nathan's condition deteriorated rapidly, the fever that had been building for days now raging unchecked. He shivered despite the warm afternoon sun, his skin burning to the touch. The wound in his shoulder had gone from angry red to a sickening purple infection, spreading visibly through the surrounding tissue. Lily tended to him as best she could with their limited supplies, her small hands gentle as she bathed his face with water from a nearby stream. Shadow maintained his vigil, a gray and white sentinel against potential threats. Time blurred for Nathan, consciousness coming in waves that left him disoriented and weak. He fought to stay alert, to maintain watch over Lily, but the infection was winning the battle his determination couldn't overcome. In one of his more lucid moments, he heard the distant thrum of approaching helicopters. His hand tightened on the rifle beside him, unsure if this was rescue or a new threat. Shadow's posture offered no reassurance. The dog was tense, growling softly as the sound grew louder. Two black helicopters appeared over the ridge, banking toward their position with practiced precision. They were unmarked, just like Maxwell's aircraft, just like the downed Apache that had started this nightmare. Nathan raised the rifle with trembling hands, placing himself between the approaching aircraft and Lily despite his weakened state. The lead helicopter hovered above the small clearing near the mine entrance, while the second maintained a higher position covering the area. A voice boomed from a loudspeaker, clear and authoritative. "Nathan Winters, we're with the FBI. Ben Mitchell sent us. Lower your weapon. You and your daughter are safe now." Nathan hesitated, suspicion warring with desperate hope. Maxwell's reach was long, her resources vast. This could easily be another trap. The lead helicopter touched down, rotors kicking up a whirlwind of dust and debris. Figures emerged, men and women in tactical gear with FBI emblazoned across their vests. They approached cautiously, weapons lowered but ready. One man separated from the group, removing his tactical helmet as he came closer. "I'm Special Agent Ramirez. Ben Mitchell contacted our unit directly. We operate independently from the standard chain of command, a precaution against exactly the kind of infiltration your evidence exposes." Nathan studied the agent's face, looking for any sign of deception. Shadow had gone quiet, his previous tension replaced by watchful assessment rather than alarm, a good sign. The dog's instincts for danger had proven unerring throughout their ordeal. Ramirez seemed to understand Nathan's hesitation. "Mitchell said to tell you that the fallen eagle has been avenged. He said you'd understand." The phrase, a direct reference to Weber, the pilot who had sacrificed everything to expose Maxwell's operation, tipped the balance. Nathan lowered the rifle, his strength finally giving out as the weapon slipped from nerveless fingers. Medical personnel rushed forward as Nathan collapsed, Lily's frightened cry, the last thing he heard before darkness claimed him. He woke to the sterile white of a hospital room, the steady beep of monitors replacing the sounds of wilderness and pursuit that had accompanied them for days. An IV fed antibiotics into his system, combating the infection that had nearly killed him. Lily was asleep in a chair beside the bed, curled into an impossibly small ball, her face peaceful for the first time since their cabin had burned. At her feet lay Shadow, his amber eyes opening immediately as Nathan stirred, alert, even in rest. Agent Ramirez stood by the window, his solid presence somehow reassuring in its steadiness. He approached the bed when he saw Nathan was awake, his expression carefully neutral, but his eyes reflecting something like respect. "Welcome back, Sergeant Winters. You've been unconscious for 36 hours. The doctors weren't sure you'd make it, that infection was aggressive. Your daughter refused to leave your side." Nathan's throat was dry, his voice a rasp when he managed to speak. Maxwell, Ramirez's expression darkened. "No body recovered from the mine yet. The collapse was extensive. It may take weeks to excavate fully. But even if she survived, her organization is coming apart at the seams." He explained that Ben Mitchell had acted immediately upon receiving the initial data transfer. Working with Ramirez's specialized FBI unit, they had executed simultaneous raids on Aegis defense facilities across the country, seizing servers and documents before Maxwell's people could destroy evidence. The full scope of the operation was still emerging, but what they'd found confirmed everything in Weber's files and more. Maxwell had built a network that extended into multiple branches of the military, the State Department, and even certain congressional offices. The weapons trafficking was just one facet of a criminal enterprise that included money laundering, blackmail, and assassination disguised as accidents or enemy action, including potentially the ambush that had killed Nathan's team in Afghanistan. We found communications suggesting Maxwell personally authorized the sale of intelligence about your unit's movements, along with the advanced weapons used in the ambush. Ramirez's voice was gentle but unflinching. She didn't just profit from war, Winters. She engineered specific outcomes when it served her interests. The confirmation of his suspicions should have brought satisfaction, but Nathan felt only a profound weariness. His teammates, his friends had died not because of enemy action or bad intelligence, but because an American executive had sold them out for profit and power. What happens now? Nathan's gaze drifted to Lily, still mercifully asleep and unaware of their conversation. Ramirez outlined the path forward. Nathan and Lily would be placed in protective custody until the immediate danger passed. Their testimony would be crucial in the cases being built against Maxwell's network. The evidence they had recovered from Weber's cache, combined with what the FBI raids had seized, created an ironclad case against dozens of conspirators. And Maxwell herself, Nathan couldn't keep the edge from his voice. After everything they'd endured, the thought of her escaping justice was unbearable. Every law enforcement agency in the country is looking for her. Her assets are frozen, her allies are scrambling to save themselves by offering testimony against her. Even if she survived the mine collapse, she's running out of places to hide. Ramirez's confidence was tempered by realism. But people like Maxwell, with her resources and connections, they can be difficult to corner. Days passed in the secure medical facility where Nathan continued his recovery. Lily adapted to their new circumstances with the same resilience she'd shown throughout their ordeal, though Nathan caught her watching the windows, sometimes a wariness in her young eyes that broke his heart. Shadow remained their constant guardian, permitted to stay with them due to Ramirez's intervention and his official status as a service animal. The dog's presence provided a continuity that helped them both adjust to their temporary confinement. Ben Mitchell visited once Nathan was strong enough for extended conversations. The journalist was younger than Nathan had expected, mid-30s, with sharp, intelligent features and the focused intensity of someone who had dedicated his career to exposing corruption, regardless of the personal cost. Mitchell had been investigating Aegis Defense for years, gathering threads of evidence, but never enough to publish the explosive allegations against such a powerful corporation. Weber's contact had been the breakthrough he'd been waiting for, but the pilot's death had severed the connection until Nathan stumbled upon the crashed helicopter. The story Mitchell was preparing would blow the case wide open, a comprehensive expose detailing Maxwell's operation, its political connections, and the human cost of her treachery. Combined with the criminal cases being built by Ramirez's team, it would ensure that even if Maxwell herself somehow escaped, her empire would be dismantled piece by piece. When Nathan's strength returned, discussions turned to what would come next. Their cabin was gone, their identities compromised. They would need to relocate, possibly enter witness protection, depending on how many of Maxwell's associates remained at large after the initial wave of arrests. The prospect of another upheaval, another loss of the life they'd built, weighed heavily on Nathan. He had chosen isolation in the Appalachians to protect Lily, but that strategy had failed catastrophically. Whatever came next needed to be different, not just for their safety, but for Lily's chance at a normal childhood. An unexpected solution came from Captain Weber's family. Upon learning of Nathan's role in exposing the truth behind their son's death, the Webers reached out through Ramirez. They owned property in rural Montana, a ranch house on substantial acreage, remote, but not isolated, with a small town nearby where Lily could attend school. It was a generous offer, motivated by gratitude and a shared understanding of the sacrifices both Weber and Nathan had made. After careful consideration and extensive security evaluations by Ramirez's team, Nathan accepted. The day before their scheduled departure for Montana, Ramirez arrived with unexpected news. Initial intelligence reports had suggested Maxwell might have survived the mine collapse and fled the country on a private aircraft. However, a private plane had crashed in the mountains of eastern Turkey, and there were preliminary indications that Maxwell might have been aboard. "We found a body, but we'll need time for confirmation," Ramirez explained. "If it is her, it would be a bitter irony, dying in a plane crash just like she arranged for Weber." This news brought Nathan complex emotions. If true, Maxwell had escaped legal justice, but not the consequences of her actions. The symmetry carried its own form of closure. 6 months later, the ranch house in Montana had become home. The transition hadn't been easy, new identities, new community, new routines, but they were adjusting. The property had come with a workshop that Nathan had converted into a carpentry studio, channeling his need for meaningful work into creating furniture and restoring antique pieces for locals. Lily was enrolled in the nearby school, making friends slowly but steadily. The wariness remained in her eyes sometimes, but it was gradually being replaced by the normal concerns of a 10-year-old girl discovering her place in the world. She still had nightmares about the mine collapse, about Maxwell's cold eyes, but they were becoming less frequent. Shadow remained their constant companion, adapting to ranch life with the same steady presence he'd provided through their darkest days. He had his own bed now, a luxury the battle-hardened military dog accepted with dignified appreciation, though he still spent most nights positioned between the main door and Lily's room. The porch of the ranch house offered a sweeping view of the valley below and the mountains beyond, different from the Appalachians, more open and vast, but beautiful in its own way. Nathan sat there most evenings watching the sunset paint the landscape in gold and crimson, a mug of coffee warming his hands against the Montana chill. One evening, as winter in Montana gradually yielded to spring, Ramirez called with news they had been waiting for through 6 months of uncertainty. Forensic tests had officially confirmed the body in the Turkish plane crash was indeed Victoria Maxwell, identified through dental records and DNA testing. The verification process had been lengthy due to the condition of the remains and the need for multiple layers of testing to ensure Maxwell hadn't staged her death. "We can finally close this file," Ramirez said. "The plane went down due to mechanical failure, a bitter irony if Maxwell truly died the same way she arranged for Weber." This news brought Nathan a complex mixture of emotions: relief that the immediate threat had ended, frustration that Maxwell had escaped formal justice, a grim satisfaction that she had ultimately failed in her larger ambitions. The prosecutions continued the web of corruption Maxwell had built, unraveling thread by thread. High-ranking military officers, Defense Department officials, even a senator, all implicated, all facing consequences for their roles in her operation. The system was flawed, compromised in places, but it was working to expel the infection Maxwell had introduced. Nathan's testimony, given via secure video link rather than in person to maintain their new identities, proved crucial in several key cases. Each conviction represented another small measure of justice for Weber, for his teammates, for all those who had died because of weapons that should never have reached enemy hands. Spring came to Montana, bringing new growth and possibility. Nathan expanded his woodworking business, finding unexpected fulfillment in creating rather than destroying. Lily blossomed in school, her natural intelligence, finding outlets in science and mathematics. She still practiced the survival skills Nathan had taught her, but they were no longer the center of her education, just one set of tools among many she was developing. Shadow, now officially retired from military service, adapted to his role as family protector, an occasional cattle herder, with dignified acceptance. The battle-hardened military dog, who had saved their lives multiple times, now spent afternoons dozing in patches of sunlight on the porch, though his alertness never truly faded. On the anniversary of their escape from the mine, Nathan took Lily fishing at a nearby stream. It was a perfect Montana spring day, the kind that made the harsh winter worth enduring. As they sat side by side on the stream bank lines cast into the clear water, Lily asked a question that caught Nathan off guard. Her voice was thoughtful, her eyes on the distant mountains rather than her father's face. "Do you think we'll ever be completely safe, Dad? Really safe, I mean. Not just hiding in a new place." The question pierced Nathan with its innocent wisdom. He'd been asking himself the same thing, wondering if hypervigilance was simply his permanent state now, if he would always be scanning horizons for threats that might never materialize. He considered his answer carefully, knowing its importance extended beyond this moment. "I think safety isn't a place, Lily. It's not something you find or build, not completely. It's something you create every day through the people you trust, the choices you make, the truth you are willing to stand for." Lily nodded slowly, absorbing his words with the serious consideration she applied to all life's lessons. Like Captain Weber, he knew he wasn't safe, but he did the right thing anyway. Exactly like that, Nathan's throat tightened with unexpected emotion. "And like you being brave when most adults would have broken down." Lily's smile was small but genuine, a glimpse of the strong young woman emerging from the traumatized child who had fled through wilderness and darkness. "We make a good team, don't we, you, me, and Shadow?" As if recognizing his name, Shadow lifted his head from where he had been resting nearby, amber eyes moving between the two humans with attentive devotion. Nathan reached over and squeezed his daughter's shoulder gently. "The best team." They continued fishing as afternoon light gilded the landscape around them. Nathan found himself thinking not of the past of loss and pursuit and narrow escapes, but of the future unfolding before them. Lily's high school years, college, perhaps the woman she would become, carrying forward the strength and integrity she'd forged in circumstances no child should have to endure. The path ahead would have challenges, they always did. Some of Maxwell's associates remained at large. The new identities they'd adopted came with their own complications. The memories of what they'd survived would never completely fade. But for the first time since Sarah's death, Nathan found himself looking forward rather than back, anticipating possibilities rather than preparing for disasters. It wasn't a perfect healing, some wounds never fully closed, but it was enough, more than enough. It was during one such evening as spring in Montana bloomed fully that a familiar vehicle appeared on the long driveway leading to the house. Nathan tensed momentarily before recognizing Ramirez's government-issue SUV. The agent typically visited periodically to update them on ongoing prosecutions, but today something seemed different. As the vehicle drew closer, Nathan could make out a second figure in the passenger seat, broad-shouldered and solid even from a distance. His heart quickened with impossible hope. The SUV stopped in the yard and the passenger door opened to reveal Marcus Reynolds very much alive, despite the explosion that had destroyed his cabin months ago. He walked with a slight limp and his right arm was held stiffly at his side, but the granite-carved face split into a rare grin when he saw Nathan. "I told you I always have an exit strategy," Marcus said, his normally gruff voice carrying an unusual hint of humor. Marcus's story illuminated what had happened after the cabin explosion. He had used the blast as a diversion while escaping through a separate tunnel system that no one else knew about. Gravely injured but alive, he had contacted an old intelligence colleague who had kept him hidden during his recovery. Once strong enough, he had connected with Ramirez and joined the task force dismantling Maxwell's network. When Lily discovered Uncle Marcus was alive, her face lit with a pure joy rarely seen since they'd left their burning cabin behind. For the first time in longer than Nathan could remember, he felt something like true peace settling over him. Not complete Sarah's absence remained an ache that would never fully heal, but something sustainable, something he could build a life around. That night, after Lily was asleep and Marcus and Ramirez had settled into the guest rooms, Nathan returned to the porch alone. The stars were brilliant in the Montana sky, more visible here than they had been even in the Appalachian wilderness. Shadow padded out to join him, the dog's warm presence a comfort against the night's chill. Nathan thought about the path that had led them here, the loss of Sarah, the isolation he'd chosen finding Weber's helicopter, the desperate flight through wilderness and darkness, the confrontation with Maxwell. So much pain and fear, so many moments when survival seemed impossible. Yet here they were, not just surviving, but beginning to live again. He thought of Weber, whose courage had set everything in motion. The pilot had known the risks, had created contingencies even while facing certain death. He had trusted that someone would find his evidence, would carry forward his final mission. That faith had not been misplaced. Nathan's hand absently stroked Shadow's head, the dog leaning comfortably against his leg. Together, they'd faced horrors and hardships that should have broken them. Instead, they had emerged stronger, not unscathed, but undefeated. The future remained uncertain in many ways. Some of Maxwell's associates were still at large, their prosecutions complicated by political connections and legal maneuvering. The memories of what they had survived would occasionally resurface in unexpected moments of vulnerability. But those concerns belonged to tomorrow. Tonight, Lily slept safely under their roof. Marcus, the friend Nathan had thought lost, was alive and recovering. They had a home, a community, a chance to build something meaningful from the ashes of what they'd lost. For a man who had spent years preparing for the worst, learning to embrace possibility again was its own kind of courage. Nathan had always been ready to die for what he believed in, for his country, for his team, for his daughter. Learning to live for those same beliefs proved the greater challenge. As the night deepened around them, Nathan made a silent promise to Sarah, to Weber, to the teammates he'd lost in Afghanistan. He would honor their sacrifices not just by surviving, but by ensuring that Lily grew up knowing the value of truth, of integrity, of standing firm when the easier path would be surrender. The weapons Maxwell had sold had taken many lives, including those of Nathan's teammates. But in the end, the most powerful weapon had been the truth. Weber had died to protect the evidence that brought down an empire built on betrayal and blood money. Spring continued to unfold across Montana, bringing new growth and renewal. Nathan expanded his woodworking business, finding unexpected fulfillment in creating rather than destroying. Lily thrived in school, her natural intelligence, finding outlets in science and mathematics. She still practiced the survival skills Nathan had taught her, but they were no longer the center of her education, just one set of tools among many she was developing. As the days grew longer, Nathan found himself planning for the future in ways he hadn't since Sarah's death. A garden extension behind the house, a summer camping trip to Yellowstone, perhaps even a puppy companion for the aging Shadow, though the loyal dog showed few signs of slowing down despite the gray hairs now prominently sprinkling his muzzle. Each small plan was an act of faith, a declaration that tomorrow was worth preparing for, not as a threat to be survived, but as a gift to be embraced. It was a perspective Nathan had lost sight of during his years of isolation, One he was slowly relearning through Lily's resilient and his own hard-won peace. As the sun began its descent toward the western mountains one evening, Nathan stood and gathered their fishing gear after a successful afternoon at the stream. Lily had caught 3 trout to his one, a fact she celebrated with good-natured teasing. Shadow fell into step beside them as they headed back toward the ranch house, its lights just becoming visible in the gathering dusk. The warmth of those lights against the darkening landscape seemed to embody the journey they'd taken, from isolation to connection, from running to standing firm, from surviving to living. Not safety as Nathan had once defined it, perhaps, but something more valuable, a life worth the risks it carried. The 3 figures moved through the Montana twilight, man-child and dog, united by bonds forged in fire and darkness, but now turning toward light. Behind them, the mountain stood silent, witness to their passage to the truth they had protected, to the future they continued to build, one step at a time.